Welcome everyone. I thought I would do a more proper video, specifically a vlog series if you would. And what better place to start my video content, or rather properly, than here if you would. This is a series called My Views. It is effectively what it is, or what it describes in the title. It's basically my view of various different topics and things, because from what I've noticed now, given the political happenstances that are occurring today, it seems to me at the very least that a lot of people are misunderstanding what a lot of other people are saying and where they're coming from in particular. So I figured I would alleviate that confusion with a series such as this. This is basically going to be the lead up to my proper content, I might want to call it, debunking various different socio-political statements that are otherwise propagandistic and false. In fact, I'm actually coming up with a series called Propaganda. I just don't know where exactly I'm going to start. It's going to be exposing a lot of things, but I figured in order to alleviate some confusion about where I'm coming from and what my position is, figured I'd make this very simple. So, from now on, this is going to be a number of videos that are going to be coming out, one each day, about my views, and I figured I would start where it all sort of began, with my intellectual awakening, which incidentally came around at the age of 9. This is going to be very implausible story, I might imagine, but it is what effectively happened. So whether or not you believe it or not, this is where most of my dispositions tend to come from. So, growing up to the age of 9, I was effectively a geek child, if you would. I was into Dungeons and Dragons, comic books, video games, you name it. I even had the Ghostbusters toy pack that you would go around and pretend to catch ghosts around there. When my cousin came around named James, who wanted to instead play cowboys and Indians, I know, right? My cousin was, well, that's irrelevant either way. But the point is that I was fairly much of a geek, very much of a nerd. And at the time, you can imagine my surprise hearing about a character called Hercules. The story sounded just like they did in the comics and in various different superhero cartoons, like The Amazing Spider-Man and fucking Iron Man, as well as some reminiscencing of Dragon Ball, the original, for the record, not Z. This was before Z came into my limelight, for the record. I was a teenager then. But, point being, is that I figured I'd ask my father, who also read comic books, although they were very, very different. Let me just say they were nothing that I read as a kid, and nothing I still don't read, for the record. But, that being set aside here, I asked him, "Hey Dad, what's the deal with this character called Hercules? Have you ever heard of him?" And he said, "Oh, Heracles?" And I said, "No, Hercules." He said, "Oh yeah, Heracles. He's the he started describing me this god whose name had been taken from the Romans and so forth, giving me a brief sort of introduction as to who Hercules was as in fiction." And at the time I didn't know this because I had assumed that I was a Christian. I was not raised a Christian. I did not become one, or rather I guess you might say I became one, given the fact that I obviously assumed I was a Christian. And, you know, there were various different talks of Jesus as a god and someone who created us and so forth and so on. And so, you know, I just generally assumed I was a Christian at the time. I didn't know there was another god or another deity of another culture. And I thought, oh wow, is that someone we believe in? My father, he's not exactly a Christian. He's what you might even call a New Ager. He basically said, "No, I don't believe in that, and you seem to be a Christian," and, well, you know, I simply nodded because I knew what a Christian was. I was fairly aware of what religion I was of, but and some of the stories and deities that I was supposed to be pursuant towards, but it wasn't something that I, in particular, really gave much thought about. So anyways, as time went by, he brought to me a book of Hercules, or Heracles, and it was a history book, really. It was a book of mythology. And then I delved straight into it ever since then. I have been reading that stuff for quite some time, and so far I wouldn't call it academic background because I'm what you would call an autodidact. I don't have any degrees to speak of, but I do read quite a few papers and I understand the literature as well as some methods. I can even translate a few things here and there. I would just need a lexicon of sorts and maybe a basic introduction to the language in case if I don't know it. But suffice to say, point being, that I took to this stuff like a duck out of water. And as a result of this, I, over time, if you would, became an atheist. But it wasn't a immediate process, in fact. It was more of a process of me coming to the age of 14 and realizing I didn't know much history about my own religion, even though I'd been learning about Greek, Middle Eastern, Roman, and Mesopotamian religions at the time. I didn't really learn too much about my own religion. So I figured, given that simple fact, I would ask around. Most people said the Protestant Reformation is an important part of Christianity that I should look at, since I was more interested in the, I guess you might say, the history of religions. In fact, at the time I even viewed religions, and to a degree somewhat of my own, although I believe mine to be true, as an anthropological phenomenon. Which I still do, actually. That is not a view that I've disapplied or disassociated from at all. I still view it as an anthropological phenomenon. But the belief in God is a very interesting psychosomatic and psychological prospect that incidentally brought me to other avenues of study, but that's neither here nor there. When I looked at the Protestant Reformation, the first thing I began to see was, whoa, people were advocating for fucking lying in order to bring people to the faith of Christianity, which they were calling truth. And I had a hard time reconciling that fact. I mean, this was like prominent leaders from Martin Luther to John Calvin, and I think even some Jesuit priests as well. Although they were stressing as well that one has to understand and know the scriptures intellectually in order to interpret what they were saying, which was something I actually did agree with. Funny enough, I agreed more with the Catholics than I did with the fucking Protestants. But that's neither here nor there. My point was that it's caused a bit of a crisis of faith of mine, and I figured I would go ahead and look back to the earliest church fathers. I had the same problem, apparently. Whether it was Tertullian or or the Lamentations of Origen, lamenting that that people are calling the scriptures a lie, and like later down he literally says, or I think it might be in another book of his, where in which he advocates for lying for the faith. I couldn't take it. Like, this was the foundation of the teachings of the people that I saw, and even though these weren't directly the apostles themselves or Jesus, I couldn't imagine that Jesus didn't have much of the same opinion. I mean, he probably did. I can't imagine he didn't. So, at that point, I became a deist. I was introduced to Thomas Paine during this time of my crisis in faith, and I read a number of deistic works, and I figured that sounded reasonable enough for God to exist until eventually I came to the age of 16. And effectively, I stated that I don't really have a reason to believe in God, so I guess I'm an atheist. And that's how my journey sort of began. And this sort of procession of finding out what I believed to be false at one point in time, and then figuring out what the truth of the matter was, seems to be a pattern that mostly purports throughout most of my life. And I would imagine that's mostly for a lot of people too as well. But I would assume that given the religious aspect of things, my particular conversion isn't all that atypical, or I should say deconversion, if you would. And I don't view religion with any amount of hostility either. A lot of my atheist peers, or at least I consider them peers, because they are of either intellectually sound premise as well as mind, but they also are atheistic, but I tend to disagree with them. These are people like Aaron Ra, Concordance, Thunderfoot, the various different YouTube atheists, and I was still doing these types of videos. As well as some of the skeptics crowd towards religion, there seems to be far too much animosity in that direction. My purveyance, my focus mainly has to do with the realm of history, archaeology, and the study of religion in an anthropological context. So, I will be doing videos on religion, I will be doing videos on politics, and this is going to be a topic that you should, at the very least, use as a video reference for this, because if you're going to make a response to anything that I say, you might want to take this video into account, because, again, as you might imagine, these are my views.